to stand in front of a group of people and say that I represent 16 million young men who served our nation in uniform between 1941 and 1945. The Depression started in 1929. I was 5 years old. And I moved and went to 7 different grammar schools because every October the ads would say 3 months concession of rent. You didn't have to pay rent for 3 months. You could live a year in one place and only pay 9 months of rent. That's the way it was. And I had a job from the time I was 7 years old delivering magazines, Collier's magazines and Liberty magazines, for which I got coupons that I could turn in for prizes. And the only prizes that I ever wanted were balsa wood models of World War I airplanes. I made every single World War I airplane, German, French, Canadian, American. I made all those models. As I got older, I made flying models. And one time, I had enough money to buy an engine, and I had not a rubber band flying model, but an engine. And on December 7th, 1945, 12:30 in the morning, I listened to the radio, and it talked about Pearl Harbor being bombed. I didn't know if Pearl Harbor was a girl or a place, and a lot of us didn't know anything about Pearl Harbor. But of course, it was the Japanese who were negotiating with President Roosevelt, who attacked our country, and I made up my mind, because I knew all about the pilots who flew in World War I, that I was going to fly fighter planes against the Japanese. I went to the Armory in Newark, New Jersey, where I was born, and I received a bunch of papers that I filled out, and on my 18th birthday, February 15th, 1942, I gave the papers to my mother and father to sign. I had a ballot. They didn't want to sign any papers. Finally, they signed the papers. I turned them into the Armory, and a month later, I was called for a physical and a mental exam. In order to become a pilot in 1941, 42, 43, you had to have 2 years of college or pass an equivalent exam, pass a mental exam. Well, I passed the mental exam, and I flunked the physical. I had 20/30 vision in one eye. And the doctors told me, go home, sit in a dark room, don't read anything, eat a lot of carrots, and come back and take the test again in 3 or 4 days. I didn't, went home. But my mother worked on the draft board. She was in part of the inductive process of the draft. And I said, Mom, bring home an eye chart. So she brought home the eye chart. I memorized the eye chart. I took the test again, and I passed. And in August of 1942, I was inducted into the military and went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. In those days, Iowa was a dirty word to me, a real dirty word. It was a test that I had to take every single year from the 3rd grade on, called the Iowa Skills Test. And I hated the word, and I hated the test. But I came to Iowa 28 years ago to live, because I chose to live here. So I'm an Iowan by choice. I don't know how many can say that, but I'm an Iowan by choice. When I went into the Army, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And we learned how to put on a uniform, we learned how to salute, we learned how to drill, we learned how to march in unity with everyone else, with our whole group. And then 3 months after we went into the service in October, we went to to Nashville, Tennessee, to take all the tests that we needed to become a pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. And I passed all the tests, chose to be a pilot, and was sent to Santa Ana, California for pre-flight training. What is pre-flight training? Well, you have to learn about the weather. You have to learn about visualizing foreign airplanes and your own airplanes. You had to learn the Morse code, because all of the communications in those days was done by the Morse code. Does anybody know what the Morse code is? You know, when you flew then, you have a GPS now, when you flew then, you had a quadrant. 4 squares in a quadrant, an A, an N, an A, and an N. You'd hear that. And the dida was the A, and da-dit was the N. And you had 2 sides. You can be going towards a cone that's broadcasting it away. You have to listen to the sound. Did it get louder or did it get softer? So we navigated by what we heard in our ears. We had to learn that. And then we went to Thunderbird Field in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Phoenix, Arizona, in those days, the county that Phoenix was in, Maricopa County, had 68,000 people. Now there's more than 3 million people living in that area. And we were assigned an instructor according to the alphabet. The first 5 guys in the alphabet, and the next 5, and the next 5, and the next 5. And there were 3 left over when they got to my last name, which is Y, Yellin. So there was Yellin, Zuniga, and another guy whose name began with Z that I don't remember. So I was the first guy chosen to solo, not because I was the best pilot, which I thought I was, but because we got our time in faster. They had 5 cadets to an instructor, we had 3. So on February 22nd, 1943, 1 week into my 19th year, I, in front of the whole class, took off in a Stearman airplane and soloed. Now, if you ground loop an airplane, what does that mean, ground loop? It's not a loop like this, it's a loop that the airplane spins around on the ground. If you ground loop your airplane, you're washed out instantly. There's not a second chance, nothing. And I made a perfect landing, my tail wheel was locked, but the plane ground looped. And I said, oh my, I'm finished, all over, my career's over. But it didn't work that way, because my instructor saw something break off of the tail wheel, something that held it together. So it wasn't my fault, it was mechanical failure. I flew 70 hours in a Stearman airplane. I soloed and landed at the crossroads of 3 cities now, Tempe, Mesa, and Chandler. If you've ever been to Arizona, it's like New York City, Brooklyn, and Queens, and Staten Island, all connected together. And there was nothing there but dirt roads and a telephone wire. So I soloed Tempe, Mesa, Chandler, finished that, graduated from primary, went to basic training in Tucson, Arizona, where we flew in an enclosed airplane, where you had radios now, and you had a different horsepower, and you had an instructor enclosed. Flew for 70 hours there, and went to Luke Field in Phoenix for advanced training. In advanced training, you had machine guns and an AT-6, and we learned how to shoot because we were training to use a weapon, and our weapon was going to be an airplane. It wasn't something you flew, it was something that you used as a weapon. And then I had 10 hours in a P-40, and I had to take the final physical exam, and I flunked the eye test. I had 20/30 vision, but they did a dirty thing, they changed the eye chart. And I remember it was a Chinese doctor, Dr. Lee, and he said to me, Yellin, you come so far, I'll let you graduate with your class, but you're going to be a transport pilot. I said, I'm a fighter pilot, sir. I have 10 hours in a P-40. And he said, if I have anything to say, you're going to become a transport pilot. I said, who can change that? And he said, the Commandant of Cadets. How do I get to see him? You go through a chain of command. What does that mean? He says, well, you ask me first. Sir, I want to see the Commandant of Cadets. So I go to the Commandant of Cadets. He's a chicken colonel. He's got chickens on his wing, on his shoulders. And he looks up and he says to me, what can I do for you, Yellin? I said, sir, I have 20/30 vision in one eye, and they want to put me in transport, but I'm a fighter pilot. He said to me, quickly, anybody that's got the guts to come and see me, you're a fighter pilot. So I graduated from flying school with a second lieutenant. I had my wings. There was a bulletin on the bulletin board in August of 1943 for our class, 43H. You can resign your commission and keep your wings and go to West Point. West Point was the only Army military school at the time. They didn't have enough qualified young men to go to West Point. None of us went to West Point. We all graduated. And like everything that they do in the military, they begin at the A and they go through the alphabet. So 28 of us, beginning with R, the letter R, went to 78th Fighter Squadron in Hawaii. Two of the R's were Bob Roseberry and Bob Ruby. They shared Cedar Rapids or Cedar Falls. And one guy with an S in his name was Al Sharon. And he went to school from Waterloo, Iowa with the Sullivan brothers. Did anybody know what happened to the Sullivan brothers right here? There were 5 brothers on one destroyer that was sunk, and all 5 were killed. Well, Al Sharon knew some of those Sullivan brothers. So the 5 guys were kept in the 78th Fighter Squadron. The 3 guys from Iowa, me, and Jack Patterson from Honolulu. All the other 23 were shipped out. They kept us because they wanted us to train other pilots, and they wanted us to be part of the permanent cadre of the 78th Fighter Squadron. We flew P-40s off of Stanley Field, which was 2 golf courses, 2 holes of the golf course of Schofield Barracks. We then got P-47s and flew them off of Mokalia. P-47s are a big, different kind of an airplane, big radial engine. P-40 was a Flying Tiger airplane that Chenault flew in China. And then we got P-51s, the Mustang. In December of 1944, we flew our P-51s to Ford Island, which was a Navy island in Pearl Harbor. We landed our planes. All of our planes were put onto a small aircraft carrier. And 5 days out at sea, we were called into a briefing room and shown a relief map of an island called Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was 8 square miles of land in the middle of the Pacific. Bombers from Saipan, B-29s from Saipan, Guam, and Tinian were flying 16-hour missions, 1,600 miles each way, 3,200 miles for 16 hours, bombing Tokyo, bombing Japan, cities in Japan. And they had a casualty rate of about 40 or 50% due to weather, mechanical problems, or no place to land if they had any problems. So Iwo Jima was going to serve 2 purposes. It would be a base for fighter planes which could fly the 750 miles over Japan, escort B-29s, and it was going to be a place that the B-29s could land if they were in trouble. And over the course of, from the time that the Marines took the island until the end of the war, 2,200 B-29s landed, each one with 11 or 12 people in the airplane. And we, as fighter pilots, could escort the B-29s and protect them. On February 19, 1945, 67,000 American Marines invaded or landed on Iwo Jima, 67,000 Marines. And there were 23,000 Japanese defenders. So 90,000 soldiers were fighting for 8 square miles of land. This was Japanese property. And there were 28,000 of those killed. 28,000. 21,000 Japanese, 7,000 American Marines. We landed on March 7, 1945, on a dirt airstrip at the base of Mount Suribachi. because the Marines had taken enough land that we could protect the airplanes and protect the pilots from Japanese killing us. When I landed on Iwo Jima and rolled back my canopy, I was overwhelmed by what I saw, by what I heard, and by what I smelled. Because death of a mouse in your wall, or a cat, or something that dies that you've smelled, that smell permeated the island of Iwo Jima, because 28,000 body parts were laying around. Don't get buried so quick. The things that I remember most about Iwo Jima for the first month, March 7th until April 7th, was strafing for the Marines as they took the land going northward, 1 yard at a time. The Japanese were fierce defenders, and the American Marines were fierce fighters. Like every man who serves his country, who is in uniform, you learn about killing another human being. You learn to use a rifle, you learn to fly an airplane, you learn to drive a tank, you're on a ship. The pure purpose of war is to kill your enemy. But you learn something else too, which is even more important than the killing of your enemy. You learn that the people that you're with are willing to give their lives to save you, and you are willing to give your life to save them. So life becomes more important for them than it is for you. And that's what soldiers do in every war, in every country. On April 7th, 1945, we flew the first long-range mission over Japan ever flown by an American airplane. Navy planes had flown over there off of carriers, but no land-based fighter planes. And I was on that first mission, that very first fighter mission, with 16 guys in my squadron. And I remember we had to focus our gun camera on a tip of a mountain or on a cloud so that we could put the gun camera film into the center of a bullseye when we evaluated our gun camera. If you were flying and you weren't coordinated, you have a ball and a needle. If that ball wasn't in the center, like a level is in the center when you use a level, carpenter's level, then your bullets wouldn't be going where you were aiming. So you had to find something that you could evaluate, some scene that you could evaluate. And I remember focusing my gun camera on the tip of Mount Fujiyama, Mount Fuji, which is a symbol of Japan, a snow-covered mountain. And I was 21 years old. And we escorted 175 B-29s as they dropped bombs on Tokyo. I watched from 20,000 feet as little fires became big fires and square miles of Tokyo were burning. It never occurred to me once that there were human beings on the ground. Not once did I ever think that the Japanese were people or human beings. They were my enemy. I flew 19 8-hour missions in a P-51, about the width of the seat that you're sitting in, for 8 hours, sitting, holding onto a stick, hand on the throttle, no navigation. We didn't do anything without over the water. We couldn't navigate. We flew on the wing of a B-29, and that B-29 broadcast an Uncle Dog, a U, and a D in Morse code. Did-a-da is a U. Da-da-did is a D. And the U was on the left side, the D was on the right side. When those two sounds came together, you got a solid sound. So you could follow the B-29 from 25 or 30 miles from behind it, pick up that sound. That's the way we navigated. I flew 19 times. Each mission was 8 hours, 7 hours and 50 minutes, 8 hours and 10 minutes, something like that. And The last mission of World War II was on August 14, 1945. I was over Japan on August 6th when they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And when I landed on Iwo Jima after that mission, a young guy from Brooklyn, Phil Maher, jumped on my wing and he said, "It's all over, we dropped one bomb, wiped out a whole city." I said, "Phil, what are you smoking? What are you drinking? Give me some." But it was true. And then on August 9th, they dropped another bomb on Nagasaki and wiped out a lot of that city. So we thought the war was over. The Japanese were negotiating. Sweden was a country that was handling American negotiations. But on August 13th, there was a bulletin posted that we were going to fly a mission again on the 14th of August. We went to a briefing, in a briefing room, and Squadron Commander Jim Tapp was asked a question by someone in the audience. "Why are we going to Japan again? It's over. We dropped 2 atomic bombs. We don't have to go anywhere. Nobody has to get killed in it anymore." And his answer was, "We have to keep the Japs honest. They're negotiating, but we have to keep them honest. But we're going to have PBYs up in the air, B-17s in the air, destroyers on the ground, and submarines near Japan, all tuned into our frequency. They're going to broadcast the code word, Ohio. The war will be over before we ever get to Japan." With that, my 19-year-old wingman, who was assigned to fly on my wing, Phil Schlomberg, leaned over to me and said, "Captain, if we go, I'm not coming back." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I have a feeling. If we go, I'm not coming back." Well, when the briefing was over, I went to Major Tapp and I said, "Jim, this is what Phil Schlomberg told me." Tapp said to me, "You tell him, you tell Phil that if he goes to see Doc Lewis, our flight surgeon, Doc Lewis can get him off the mission." I told Phil Schlomberg that. He says, "No way, I'm going to go." The next morning, August 14th, early in the morning, I told Phil Schlomberg, "Get on my wing and don't get off. We're never going to reach Japan. The code word will be broadcast. It'll be all over." We took off. We flew up to where we had to drop our external wing tanks. Nobody heard the code word Ohio. We went in. We strafed airfields near Tokyo. And we needed 90 gallons of fuel to get back to Iwo Jima from Japan. 90 gallons. We could cut our fuel consumption down to 20 or 22 gallons an hour. So we had a 3.5, 4-hour mission back. We needed 90 gallons. Somebody called in 90 gallons, and that meant that the whole squadron would fly out to the B-29. 90 gallons was called. I looked over at my wing. Phil Schlomberg was on my wing. I gave him a thumbs up. He gave me a thumbs up. And I took my flight into some clouds, maybe 30, 40, or 50 seconds. When I came out of the clouds, Phil Schlomberg was gone. Nobody heard a call from him. Nobody saw his plane go down. When we landed on Iwo Jima, we found out that the war had been over for 3 hours. And he was the last man killed in combat in World War II. I came home in December of 1945, and I went to visit his mother and his sisters and a brother. And I had his wings, his lieutenant bars, and the emblem from his hat. I brought them in Brooklyn, gave them to them, and when I was leaving, his mother said to me, "Captain, it should have been you who was killed, not my son Philip, and I hope you never sleep a night in your life like I can't sleep." I walked out of that house and I could not drive my car back to New Jersey. I sat for an hour or two. I was really shaken. Well, I was shaken for 30 years as a young man. I couldn't sleep. I thought of suicide. I couldn't hold a job. I met a young lady on a blind date on Good Friday, 1949. Her name was Yellin. We got engaged on Memorial Day, May 30th. We got married in October. We're still married. 65 years later. She's not Alzheimer's now, she's not well. She's in a nursing home, but we made a commitment, we kept that commitment. Very big word in my life, commitment. In 1975, I learned Transcendental Meditation. That's what brought me to Iowa. That's what brought me to Fairfield. And instantaneously, I got my life back. I became an expert in real estate, and in 1983, I was a consultant to the Bank of America, the Bank of California, Wells Fargo Bank in California, the real estate problem loans. And I was asked by one of the banks if I would represent them and go to Japan and speak to the Japanese Mitsui Bank Group about investing money in real estate in America. And I said, no way I'm going to Japan. Japan is not a place I want to visit. Japanese are not people that I want to know. And I came home and I said, Helene, I just turned down a trip to Japan. She said, well, you didn't ask me. What do you think happened? March of 1983, my wife and I went to Japan. In those days, I had a big mustache and long hair. I cut my mustache off and I cut my hair short on my 90th birthday because I do a lot of speaking for the military. And they don't like it with mustaches and long hair. So I wear a uniform and now I look like a military guy. Well, in 1983, we went to Japan. We went to Tokyo, and we got out on the streets on Sunday, and shopping area, the Ginza, and I saw human beings. I saw people. I saw people that were well-dressed and well-mannered. And I looked up through the buildings and I saw the B-29s dropping their bombs, but now they were dropping their bombs on me. And I had to do my business and get out of the city. The first place we went to was to a Maple Leaf festival. And I was sitting on a train with a young boy across from me, maybe 3 or 4 years old, on his mother's lap, looking at me. And when I looked at him, he looked away. When he looked at me, I looked away. Did that 2 or 3 times, and put my hands out like this, like, come to me. And he jumped off his mother's lap, jumped onto my lap, started to finger my mustache. There are very few mustaches in Japan. I was probably the first mustache he ever saw. And the whole crowd laughed. They thought it was wonderful, and I thought it was wonderful. On the last night that we were in Japan on that trip in 1983, Helene, with mother's intuition, said Robert will love Japan. Robert was a senior at San Diego State University. He was the 4th of our 4 sons. So when we got back to America, I told Rob, you can go to, we're going to give you a trip to Japan for a graduation present. So we went to Japan in 1984, came back, didn't know what he wanted to do, graduated from college, and he took a job teaching English for 1 year, signed a contract for 1 year to teach English in Japan. And he went there in 1984, and now it's 2015, 31 years later, he hasn't come back yet. He's still there. In 1987, we went to Japan. He wanted us to come, and we met a young lady, Takako Yamakawa, whose father had 3 hours and a 0, was sent to China, where he serviced Japanese airplanes, and he had a whole group of guys that were kamikaze pilots who killed themselves, and he was the only guy of the group that were kamikaze pilots that lived. I didn't know that then. But Robert said he was going to get married. He and Takako wanted to get married. And I saw the faces of the 16 guys that had died fighting the Japanese that I knew personally were my friends. And I felt strange, but it was his life that was important, not my life that was important. I said, what does her father say? And he said, he won't meet me. It took 7 months for Takako to get a meeting between my son and his family. And when he met the family, the brothers, Takako's brothers, asked questions of him. They pounded on him about his religion, his education, his ability to make a living. and whether or not he was going to take their sister back to America. And the father didn't say anything. When they talked, when the father spoke, he asked my son 5 questions. He said, "How old is your father?" Robert said, 63. "Was he in the war?" "Yes." "What did he do?" "He was a pilot." "What did he fly?" P-51s. "Where?" "Over Japan." And that ended the meeting. He went home, this man, and said to his wife, "Make the wedding." And she went ballistic. She said, "For 43 years, you've been telling me you hate the Americans, you never fired a bullet against them, you didn't die for your emperor, and now you want your daughter, our daughter, to marry this man?" She said, "Why?" And he said, "Any man that could fly a P-51 against the Japanese and live is a brave man, and I want the blood of that man to flow through the veins of my grandchildren, our grandchildren." So on March 5th, 1988, nearly 43 years to the day that I landed on Iwo Jima, my young son Robert got married in a Japanese ceremony in Japan. And 2 days later, with a translator, Mr. Yamakawa and I went to an onsen, a bath, big ryokan, hot bed. And we talked for 3 hours through a translator. When we were finished speaking, he said to the translator, he never knew that there were other people in the world that felt the same way about family, religion, education, everything. And that was told to me in English. And we bonded, and we became family. My enemy became my family. About 4 years after the wedding, 5 years after the wedding, we're in Japan visiting. Robert now has children. And my youngest, he gave the children names in Japanese that we could use in English. His oldest son is called Kentaro. Ken is a Japanese character, and Taro is a Japanese character. We call him Ken. His second son is named Simon, S-A-I-M-O-N in Japanese, Simon. It was my father's name. And my granddaughter, now 19 years old, is named Sarah, Sarah. So we have Japanese names that we can use in English. When Ken was 4 or 5 years old, I was in Japan. I took him to the local 7-Eleven type store. I was going to buy some beer and some sushi and some greens or something to eat. When I'm finished shopping, Ken looks at me and he speaks English because his father only spoke English to them. And he looked at me and he says, "Grandpa, buy me a toy." I said, "Ken, I don't have any money." He says, "Grandpa, buy me a book." I said, "Ken, I don't have any money." "Grandpa, buy me some ice cream." "Ken, I don't have any money." I took him home. Now 3 or 4 years later, we're back. Maybe he's 8 or 9 years old, back in Japan. And his mother can't get him to do his homework. His father can't get him to do his homework. So I put my arm around his shoulder and I whisper in his ear, "Ken, if you go inside to your room and you do your homework, I'll take you to the store and I'll buy you a toy." "Show me your money, Grandpa." He now is 25 years old. And he graduated from the MIT of Japan, Hokkaido University, with a master's degree in physics, and was one of 20,000